Now on Talking Solutions, want to welcome back Will Batista talking about Marsy's Law of Nevada.
Thank you so much for having me.
Will, we've talked over the past year about the importance of Marsy's Law. And being that we've got Election Day coming up very quickly, I bet you're feeling this.
Very quickly.
November 6th is the day when we as voters cast our votes.
Yeah.
About these very important issues. Several questions on the ballot. Marsy's Law is number 1 on the ballot, right?
Yep.
And from what I've seen, a lot of times on my Facebook page, since I have indicated that I like the idea of Marsy's Law, I'll be open about that. I think it's a good idea. I would call it a no-brainer. But one of the things I've seen come across is they present it and they go, hey, we do not have equal rights here in Nevada.
Yes, that's one of the main themes of our campaign. And the reason why is we do not have equal constitutional rights here in Nevada. There are a number of prescribed rights in statute, and there is some language in the Nevada Constitution. But the reason why we make that a theme of our campaign is because they're not enforceable and they're not strong enough. And so with question 1, a yes vote would essentially replace the current language and essentially put in new language that is stronger and enforceable for victims of crime here in Nevada. So that's why it is so critical for voters to understand that we are elevating the rights of victims of crime to the constitutional level.
Some people who are listening to us today might also not know that in order for us to amend the Nevada state constitution, voters have to say okay to this twice.
Actually, our path was a little bit different. So in Nevada, you have 2 routes to go the constitutional route. You can collect signatures and then go through the ballot twice.
Like they did with marijuana.
Correct. Our route was a little bit different. We went through the legislature twice, once in 2015 and then again in 2017. And now we only go to the voters once in order for us to be able to amend the Constitution. So it's a little bit of a different process, but we feel that it was important to have as many stakeholders participate in this process as possible. And so we gathered members of the legislature, obviously, since it's going through that process, members of law enforcement and legal community, members of domestic violence advocate organizations to gather together to build language that would be right for Nevada. And that's important for people to understand that question 1 is tailored for Nevada and making sure that victims of crime here under our Constitution will have those strong enforceable rights.
Because Marsy's Law has been going all over the country in a lot of different states.
Yeah, there are other measures that have passed throughout the country: California, Illinois, North and South Dakota, and most recently Ohio. This year, there are crime victims' rights bills that are going to appear in Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and of course here in Nevada. So it's important for us to make sure that voters understand that this is specific to Nevada and reflective of our Constitution here in the state.
We're talking with Will Batista discussing Marsy's Law, which is on the ballot for us all to vote on November 6th, trying to get crime victims' rights to be on an even
playing field.
Yes, compared to the criminals themselves. We all know they have rights. Every time you watch one of those crime cop shows on TV, they're always like, read him his Miranda rights, blah, blah, blah. They have a lot of rights that are strictly enforced.
Yep.
But when it comes to being the victim of one of those said criminals, not as much.
Correct. That's why we're making such a large push. We want to make very clear that nothing in Marsy's Law would take away from those protected constitutional rights that those that are accused are entitled to. In fact, we feel that they're very essential to the criminal justice process. What we're trying to do is make sure that victims have an equal set of constitutional rights. Some of those are the right to be treated with dignity, fairness, and respect, the right to be notified about different events during the criminal justice process, the right to be present and heard during the procedures, and the right to timely and full restitution, making sure that those who have been victims of crime actually receive some form of restitution to try to make them as whole as possible to the best of their ability. And so these are rights that we feel need to be in the Constitution so that victims of crime have some form of standing in order to have them enforced.
Will, in talking to people about the importance of Marsy's Law for people here in Nevada, do you find that a lot of these people don't realize we don't don't already have these rights?
Yeah, that's a big part of our discussions. Question 1 is going to guarantee victims of crime certain rights on a constitutional level. And people don't understand that there's a hierarchy of laws in this country. Obviously, the United States Constitution reigns supreme, followed by their statutes, state constitutions, and state statutes. And so by bringing it up to the state constitutional level, it puts it on a higher playing field than if it's just in statute. It also gives victims a remedy in the event that their rights aren't observed to be able to go out and petition the court to actually have them enforced. And so that's the biggest discussion and a lot of legalese that people kind of get caught up in. But essentially what we want to tell people is, listen, you have to vote yes on question 1 because none of us ever knows if we're going to be a victim of crime. And if you are, we want to make sure that you have strong constitutional rights that can be enforced. And I'm fortunate enough that I've thankfully never been a victim of crime, but every one of us knows somebody, 1 or 2 degrees of separation who may have been a victim of crime. Oftentimes we come across folks who have been, unfortunately, victims of domestic abuse, for example. And I'll give you an example of how Marsy's Law would come into play here is the right to notification and the right to privacy aspect. One, on the notification aspect, in the case of a domestic abuse, you want to be notified if that person has been released.
They're out on the streets.
Yeah, if they're out, you want to make sure that you're at least aware that that person has posted bail and gotten out. Secondly is the privacy aspect. You will have a right to privacy, meaning that person's not going to be able to know where you're staying, whether that's at a relative's home or in a shelter. That's really critical. The way that restraining orders work nowadays, you're required to give, where you're staying, where your kids go to school, where you go to the grocery store, all the places that you frequent, and then it's given to the perpetrator. We find that that's kind of backwards, right? Because what you're doing is you're providing a roadmap to re-victimization of that person.
You will find me here.
Yeah. So we want to make sure that we change that and we empower victims of crime so that they know that their rights are protected and that their information is also protected.
Just like you said, Will, fortunately, I have not been a victim of crime. And I am happy to lend my voice and my vote on question 1 on Election Day on November 6th to say, yes, Marsy's Law. Because even though, as I said, I'm blessed, haven't had to deal with it, hopefully will never have to deal with it. There are a lot of people out there who are suffering from not having the protections that we're offering through Marsy's Law.
Yeah, and we appreciate that you're bringing some light to this issue because a lot of people during this election year, they're going to get caught up in, who's going to be the next governor, who's going to be the next senator or congressperson. But what people don't realize oftentimes is that ballot questions and ballot initiatives have a more direct impact on your life than some of the folks that we elect to Congress. And so what we want to tell people is that, listen, again, you never know if this is ever going to affect your life. We want to make sure that we're prepared for it. And the great thing about our measure, too, is that it's not a political issue. It's a people issue. We have, I believe it's over 160 elected officials statewide from both the Republican Party and Democrat Party who have come together to lend their voice to voting yes on question 1. We have at the top U.S. Senator Dean Heller and we have U.S. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. Folks who often don't agree on many things have both lent their voice to this because they understand how important it is to vote yes on question 1 and that people are educated about giving victims and empowering victims with constitutional rights.
Will Batista is with us today on Talking Solutions. We're discussing question 1 on the November 6th ballot, and it's Marsy's Law. Maybe you've heard of it. We've got to vote for this and let it pass so that it will become a permanent part of our Nevada state constitution. Will, is there any concern that this wouldn't pass? Because it seems to make sense.
My biggest concern is that voters are educated on it. I mentioned earlier that there's so many other races catching people's attention, and there's some other ballot issues as well. My plea is to voters to be educated about these ballot issues and understand what question 1 would actually do. If you are in favor of victims' rights, if you're in favor of being empowered, then you should vote yes on question 1. I think our biggest hurdle is information and getting people's questions answered. And so we invite people to visit our Facebook page, visit our Twitter account, our actual website as well. Our website is yesononenv.com. Again, that's yesononenv.com. People can read the language for themselves that was passed during the legislative session. They can take a look at some of the folks who are supporting us. We have an endorsements page. But also, if you've ever been a victim of crime, there's a resources page on there. We do not provide resources ourselves, but we have great partner organizations. We have their information posted there on the resources. So my biggest concern would be that people be informed about what's going on with this issue and to make sure that they understand the importance of voting yes on question 1.
And the website is yesononenv.com. You know that I always put the links and everything on the Talking Solutions Facebook page, along with the podcast of our discussion today. Will Batista is in studio with us talking about Marsy's Law. Who was Marsy? Who is this law named after?
That's great that we can give the background on this. Marsy Lee Nicholas was a college student back in 1983 at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Unfortunately, she was stalked and murdered by her ex-boyfriend. About a week after the funeral, the family was coming out of a grocery store and they run into the accused murderer. Unbeknownst to them, he had been released and they had not been notified. They went to the authorities and they basically said, well, we didn't really have to tell you because there's no law in place that requires us to do so. So fast forward to 2008, her family decided to make sure that victims' rights were a priority for state legislatures and for people throughout this country. The effort really started in California back in 2008 with the passage there, and then went on to 2014 to pass in Illinois, and then in 2016 in North and South Dakota, and as I mentioned earlier, recently in Ohio. Victims' rights are critical, and I think there's been individuals fighting for victims' rights in each one of our states for many, many years, and this has kind of been the big push to make sure that it actually gets on ballots and to get in front of voters and legislators to make sure that it gets into state constitutions. And we have efforts going on throughout several different states throughout the country.
Marsy's Law is spreading all across the U.S.
Yeah. And again, it's important to understand that it is a state-specific initiative with stakeholders from here in Nevada. And that's critical for people to understand that, yes, it's under the banner of Marsy's Law, but it really does have strong grassroots support here throughout the state of Nevada.
Just seems to make sense that crime victims should have rights in our Nevada state constitution.
I agree with you, and hopefully the voters of Nevada will see it the same way. And the way that the ballot language is written, you mentioned was their concern, sometimes is confusing for voters to understand. And so I want to make sure the people who are listening to this understand that a yes vote will give victims of crime stronger constitutional rights. The ballot language talks about removing current language and replacing it with new language that may be enforced. That is correct, but we want to make sure to simplify that for voters to understand that a yes vote would mean that you want stronger enumerated constitutional rights for victims of crime in the state of Nevada.
Better, stronger rights.
Yes.
November 6th, of course, is the day when we will all be casting our votes. Of course, I love early voting, so I can't count that out.
Early voting starts October 20th, I believe.
Getting close.
Yes.
No matter how you vote, early or on the actual day on November 6th, saying yes on question 1 is approving the addition of Marsy's Law specifically tailored for the state of Nevada.
Correct.
To our state constitution.
Absolutely. Those rights, the right to notification, the right to privacy, the right to restitution, the right to be treated with fairness, dignity, and respect, amongst many other rights that are enumerated in it.
You've been in before. You know that I'm going to ask Talking Solutions, what can we do to help you?
Our number one thing is to spread awareness of the issue. And people often don't even come to grips with it until they're standing alone after they've been a victim of crime. The person has been hauled away, read their Miranda rights, and you're just there wondering what's the next step.
What now?
Exactly. And what you can do is to help spread our message about the importance of voting yes on question 1 and having it pass, whether that's, having people, like I mentioned before, visit our website, visit our Facebook our Twitter sites, which is Marsy's Law for Nevada. It's important that people get the information they need and to understand fully what it is that they're voting on.
This can make a difference for every crime victim in the state of Nevada.
Yeah, and we come across crime victims on a daily basis that have either not been notified or don't know what to do, what resources are available to them. It may not necessarily affect your life, but it will affect the life of hundreds, if not thousands of folks throughout the state of Nevada.
And of course, all the links and everything on the Talking Solutions Facebook page, along with the podcast of our discussion. Am I forgetting anything?
No. We, again, emphasize that this isn't a political issue, it's a people issue. And we feel strongly about being able to give a voice to the voiceless, being able to provide some kind of remedy to those who have already been victimized and who have already suffered so much. This will be one little piece that we can do in their recovery and their healing process. And we want to make sure that they have a voice throughout this.
Election Day, November 6th, and as you mentioned, Will, early voting starts on October 20th. Question 1 is for Marsy's Law.
And how appropriate that it's number 1, because we feel that throughout the criminal justice process that victims should be number 1. They should be kept at the top of everybody's minds. And so we think it should be at the top of every voter's mind as well.
Giving crime victims at least the same rights as the offenders themselves.
Yeah.
It just makes sense.
Yes.
That's what Marsy's Law is all about. All the information on our Talking Solutions Facebook page. Will Batista, we appreciate you coming to join us here on Talking Solutions to give us all the details.
Thank you for bringing light to this important issue.
Talking Solutions is a production of the Community Relations Department here at Beasley Media Group Las Vegas. Get more information on today's topic on our Talking Solutions page on Facebook, where you will also find links and a podcast of today's show. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.